7 people died in broad daylight. A 14-year-old girl became collateral damage. This massacre changed Australia forever. Over 1,000 members, 70 chapters, millions of dollars in seized weapons, drugs, and cash. These are the numbers that law enforcement fears most. Today, we rank the 6 most lethal motorcycle gangs terrorizing Australia right now, from bombings in Perth to assassinations of police officers, to organized drug networks spanning the continent. The gangs you're about to see control territories, infiltrate businesses, and operate with military precision. Some have been legally banned by entire states. Others continue their operations despite constant police raids. By the end of this countdown, you'll understand why these organizations strike fear into communities across Australia. Can you guess which gang claims the #1 spot? Drop your prediction in the comments below. Let's start with number 6. Number 6, the Coffin Cheaters Motorcycle Club, Perth, Western Australia, 1970. While other Australian biker gangs copied American models, the Coffin Cheaters built something different. Something homegrown. Something that would become one of Australia's most feared organizations. They started small, but they had big ambitions. And when the New Zealand-based mongrel mob tried to establish territory in Perth during the late 80s, the Coffin Cheaters sent a message that echoed across the continent. Bombings, street warfare, violent confrontations that forced an entire gang to flee the city. The mongrel mob never returned to Perth. But that was just the beginning. The Coffin Cheaters expanded their criminal operations, methamphetamine distribution networks stretching across Western Australia, weapons smuggling operations that supplied rival gangs and criminal organizations. Their conflict with the Finks Motorcycle Club turned Perth into a war zone. Public assaults in broad daylight, severed fingers left as warnings, shootings that terrorized innocent bystanders. Despite constant police raids, asset seizures, and arrests, the Coffin Cheaters maintained their grip on Western Australia. They've even expanded internationally, with chapters in Norway and Indonesia. But Perth's homegrown terror pales compared to our next gang's international reach. Number 5, the Gypsy Joker Motorcycle Club, San Francisco, 1956. The Gypsy Jokers began as part of California's outlaw biker culture. But when they arrived in Sydney, in 1969, they brought something Australia had never seen before. Becoming a Gypsy Joker isn't easy. Prospective members face a grueling 2-year initiation period. Loyalty tests that push men to their breaking point. Brotherhood codes that demand absolute obedience. Those who survive the process become part of something deadly. Don Hancock knew this firsthand. As Western Australia's former chief detective, he understood the threat these gangs pose to law enforcement. But understanding them and surviving them are two very different things. 2001. A car bomb explosion ended Hancock's life. The Gypsy Jokers had assassinated a police detective. The message was clear. No one was untouchable. From their strongholds across southern and western Australia, the Gypsy Jokers built their empire on Harley-Davidson culture and brutal violence. They infiltrated legitimate businesses, controlled drug territories, and eliminated anyone who stood in their way. Law enforcement fought back with everything they had. Asset seizures worth millions, death threat charges against leadership, ongoing investigations that continue to this day. While Gypsy Jokers target police, our number 4 gang built a military machine. Number 4, the Comanchero Motorcycle Club, Sydney, 1966. A Scottish immigrant named William George Ross, known to everyone as Jock, had a vision. Not just another motorcycle gang, not just another criminal organization. He wanted to build an army, and that's exactly what he did. The Comancheros operated like a military unit. Weekly drills that pushed members to their physical limits. An elite strike force of the toughest, most ruthless fighters they could find. Paramilitary discipline that turned bikers into soldiers. Under Jock Ross's iron leadership, the Comancheros earned a reputation as the most violent Australian biker club of the 70s and 80s. Their clashes with rival gangs left bodies in the streets and communities living in fear. But Ross wasn't building this machine for random violence. He had bigger plans: drug trafficking networks that spanned the continent, extortion operations that targeted legitimate businesses, firearms networks that supplied weapons to the highest bidder. The Comancheros controlled their territory through fear, discipline, and overwhelming force. Internal disputes were settled quickly and brutally. Leadership challenges ended careers and sometimes lives. By the early 80s, tensions were rising. Territorial disputes with rival gangs intensified. Weapons stockpiling reached dangerous levels. Something was building, something that would change Australian biker culture forever. But the Comancheros weren't alone at Milperra. Their enemies await at number 3. Number 3. The Bandidos Motorcycle Club. San Leon, Texas, 1966. The Bandidos built their reputation on violence, brotherhood, and the image of a sombrero-wearing bandit with a machete and pistol. They were everything the American outlaw biker culture represented, but they wanted more. 1983, Sydney. Anthony Mark Spencer, a former Comanchero member who had encountered Bandidos during his time in the United States, saw an opportunity. He established the first Australian Bandidos chapter and opened the door to something catastrophic. The Bandidos grew fast. 400 members, 45 chapters across the continent. They recruited from every background, every ethnicity, anyone willing to embrace their outlaw code. And they had a problem with the Comancheros. September 2nd, 1984, Father's Day, Viking Tavern Car Park, Milperra, New South Wales. What started as a routine motorcycle swap meet became Australia's most infamous gang massacre. The Comancheros arrived first. The Bandidos showed up minutes later. Tensions had been building for months. Territorial disputes, personal grudges, and the kind of hatred that only grows between former brothers. Someone fired the first shot. What happened next lasted only minutes, but changed Australia forever. Gunfire erupted across the car park. Innocent families ran for cover. A 14-year-old girl named Leanne Walters, just there with her family, caught a stray bullet and died. When the smoke cleared, 7 people were dead. 4 Comancheros, 2 Bandidos, and 1 innocent bystander. The Milperra massacre had shocked the nation. Law enforcement responded with the largest crackdown in Australian biker history. Mass arrests, intense media coverage, public fear that forced politicians to create new laws targeting motorcycle gangs. But the Bandidos survived. They adapted. They continued their drug trafficking operations, prostitution rings, and murder for hire services. The massacre had made them infamous, and infamy brought power. Milperra shocked Australia. But wait until you see the gang that controls entire states. Number 2. The Rebels Motorcycle Club. Let me give you some numbers that will chill you to the bone. Over 1,000 members, 70 chapters, nationwide presence. This isn't just a motorcycle gang. This is an empire. Brisbane, Queensland, 1969. They started as the Confederates, but that name didn't capture their true ambition. When they became the Rebels, they embraced what they really were. Australia's largest and most powerful outlaw motorcycle organization. Their insignia tells you everything you need to know. A Confederate flag with a skull wearing a cap. They're not hiding what they represent. The Rebels fought wars that make other gang conflicts look like schoolyard fights. Their battles with the rock machine turned cities into battlegrounds. Their confrontations with the Bandidos left bodies scattered across multiple states. But size brings its own problems. Nick Martin knew this better than anyone. As the Rebels' Western Australia president, he controlled vast criminal operations, drug trafficking networks that reached every corner of the continent, legitimate businesses that served as fronts for money laundering, community intimidation tactics that kept witnesses silent. 2011. Someone tried to kill Martin with a car bomb. He survived, But the message was clear. Even the most powerful rebels leader wasn't safe. 2020, Nick Martin attended a speedway event in Perth. A sniper's bullet ended his life in front of hundreds of witnesses. The rebels had lost one of their most feared commanders. The gang's criminal empire continued to operate. Drug trafficking networks generated millions in illegal profits. They infiltrated gyms, security companies, and construction businesses. They used intimidation and violence to control their territories. But success bred internal problems. Leadership battles tore chapters apart. Money disputes led to expulsions and defections. Factional splits weakened their structure. Despite these internal struggles, the rebels maintained their grip on power. They penetrated communities across Australia. They recruited new members. They adapted to law enforcement pressure. 1,000 rebels members sounds terrifying, but one gang has Queensland law enforcement so concerned they've been legally banned. Number 1, the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. There's only one motorcycle gang in Australian history that's been legally classified as a criminal organization and completely banned from operating in an entire state. Only one gang that terrifies law enforcement so much they've taken unprecedented action. The Hells Angels. Queensland made it official. Being a member of the Hells Angels is now a criminal offense. Wearing their patches, attending their meetings, or associating with their members can land you in prison. No other gang in Australia has faced this level of legal condemnation. But why? 1975, the Hells Angels established their first Australian chapter, bringing with them decades of international criminal experience. They weren't starting from scratch. They had a global network of support, financing, and expertise. They built the most diverse criminal portfolio Australia had ever seen, methamphetamine trafficking operations that generated millions in profits, cocaine distribution networks that reached every major city, murder-for-hire services that eliminated rivals and witnesses, arms trafficking operations that supplied weapons to other criminal organizations. But here's what made them truly dangerous. They infiltrated legitimate businesses. Gyms became recruitment centers and money laundering operations. Tattoo parlors served as meeting places and communication hubs. Security companies gave them access to sensitive information and protected locations. They weren't just operating outside the law. They were operating inside legitimate society. Their wars with rival gangs turned Australia into a battlefield. Conflicts with the Bandidos left bodies in multiple states. Confrontations with the rebels sparked violence that continues today. Battles with the Comancheros created blood feuds that span generations. Law enforcement responded with everything they had. Nationwide crackdowns involving hundreds of officers. Asset seizures worth tens of millions of dollars. Ongoing investigations that required interstate cooperation and international assistance. But the Hells Angels adapted. They survived. They continued operating. Today, they remain active across Australia. Their international connections provide resources that domestic gangs can't match. Their criminal operations continue to generate massive profits. Their influence reaches into communities, businesses, and institutions. Queensland's legal ban represents law enforcement's acknowledgement of a terrifying truth. The Hells Angels aren't just another motorcycle gang. They're a criminal organization so dangerous, so well organized, and so deeply embedded in society that normal law enforcement methods aren't enough. That's why they're number 1. 6 gangs. Over 2,000 members combined. Hundreds of criminal charges. Communities living in fear across the continent. But let's break down what those numbers really mean. 2,000 active criminals operating across 14 states and territories. 14 major chapters in Queensland alone before the Hells Angels ban. 70 rebels chapters spreading their influence into every corner of Australian society. 400 Bandidos members who survived the Milperra massacre and grew stronger. These aren't just motorcycle clubs gathering on weekends to ride their bikes. They're criminal empires that have shaped Australia's underworld for over 50 years. They control drug trafficking routes worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They infiltrate legitimate businesses and corrupt entire industries. They recruit from prisons, schools, and vulnerable communities. From the Coffin Cheaters' homegrown violence in Perth, where they bombed an entire rival gang out of the state, to the Gypsy Jokers' assassination of police detective Don Hancock, a car bomb that sent a message to every law enforcement officer in Australia, to the Milperra massacre that changed everything. 7 people dead in a Father's Day shootout that traumatized a nation, to the rebels' 1,000-member empire that spans from Brisbane to Perth, to the Hells Angels' complete legal ban in Queensland, the first and only gang to face such unprecedented government action. Each of these stories represents decades of violence, corruption, and criminal enterprise. The Coffin Cheaters didn't just fight the mongrel mob. They waged a campaign of terror that included bombings, shootings, and street warfare that lasted months. The Gypsy Jokers didn't just kill Don Hancock. They planned his assassination for months, studied his routines, and executed a car bombing that required expertise and resources. The Milperra massacre wasn't just a shootout, it was the culmination of years of territorial disputes, personal vendettas, and power struggles between 2 military-style organizations. The rebels aren't just a large gang, they're a nationwide criminal network with legitimate business fronts, political connections, and the resources to wage war across multiple states simultaneously. And the Hells Angels, they're not just banned in Queensland because of their size or reputation, they're banned because law enforcement determined that normal policing methods weren't sufficient to combat their level of criminal sophistication and international connections. Each gang continues to operate today. Right now, as you're watching this video, these organizations are conducting criminal operations across Australia. Law enforcement agencies are spending millions of taxpayer dollars on ongoing investigations. The Australian Federal Police coordinates with state police forces in operations that involve hundreds of officers. Interstate task forces share intelligence about member movements, criminal activities, and planned operations. International cooperation tracks their global connections. The Hells Angels communicate with chapters in the United States, Europe, and Canada. The Bandidos maintain their Texas headquarters relationship. Intelligence agencies monitor communications, financial transactions, and travel patterns that span continents. But these organizations adapt faster than law enforcement can respond. When police shut down one drug trafficking route, they establish 2 more. When authorities raid one clubhouse, they operate from legitimate businesses. When members get arrested, new recruits take their place within weeks. Legitimate businesses face constant infiltration and intimidation. Security companies hire gang members as employees, giving them access to sensitive information about wealthy individuals, business operations, and law enforcement activities. Construction companies become fronts for money laundering operations. Motorcycle dealerships provide cover for stolen vehicle operations. Young people across Australia become targets for recruitment every day. Gang members visit schools, sporting events, and community centers looking for vulnerable teenagers. They offer belonging, protection, and financial opportunities that legitimate society often can't provide. Once recruited, these young people face years of criminal activity, violence, and imprisonment. Violence erupts without warning in communities that never expected to face such threats. The Milperra massacre happened at a family-friendly motorcycle swap meet. Nick Martin was assassinated at a community speedway event with children present. Gang warfare doesn't respect innocent bystanders or safe spaces. Were you surprised by the number 1 choice? Many people expected the rebels to claim the top spot because of their size and nationwide presence. Others thought the Bandidos would rank first because of their role in the Milperra massacre. But the Hells Angels' legal ban in Queensland sets them apart from every other gang on this list. That legal ban represents something unprecedented in Australian criminal justice. Queensland didn't just classify them as a criminal organization, they made membership itself illegal. Wearing Hells Angels patches in Queensland can result in imprisonment. Attending their meetings is a criminal offence. Even associating with known members can lead to charges. This legal action required extensive evidence gathering, legislative changes, and court proceedings that lasted years. Queensland law enforcement had to prove that the Hells Angels organization itself was inherently criminal, not just that individual members committed crimes. This level of legal condemnation has never been applied to any other criminal organization in Australian history.